Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on how and when to use the AxIT system for optimal assessments. In today's session, we are joined by MSK sports podiatrist and director of MK Active, Nick Knight. For those who are new joining us this evening, we are PhysEquip and we supply specialist MSK technologies and education on diagnostic ultrasound, shockwave, force plates and dynamometry tools, which tonight's session will be focused on. We work with the strength by numbers AxIT system, which includes force plates and two handheld dynamometer tools, which Nick is going to talk to us today about how and when to use them for assessments. The format of tonight, Nick is going to deliver a short presentation for us, which will be followed by a Q&A. So we're going to cover some of the pre-submitted questions we've received. If you are listening live, please feel free to submit some of your questions you do have in the Q&A tab, and we can answer these too. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Nick for the presentation, and then we can have a chat afterwards.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for asking me to sort of give this talk. So as Katie sort of said, the aim is sort of 10, 15-minute presentation, focusing not on the evidence behind strength testing in clinical practice, but more focusing on how do we use it in clinic, and then a Q&A session at the end. So people can just feel free to ask as many questions as they like. So a bit about me, a musculoskeletal sports podiatrist, and then my master's was a mixture of lower limb rehabilitation modules and then also musculoskeletal podiatry. We got a team of graduate sports rehabilitators and podiatrists based in the south of England, and we're very, very focused on rehab and helping people get fitter and stronger, and also run a sort of a lower limb education club, as it were, called the MSK Lunch Club, around about just helping people, educate them around about management of lower limb pathology. With regards to dynamometers in clinic and strength testing, I got my first dynamometer about 11 years ago. I worked it out now. So been using them in clinic for a long period of time, and I think I've tried near enough every dynamometer on the market, and now obviously using the AxIT strength by numbers stuff. So really, just is strength testing useful in clinic? And the answer is yes. There are loads of papers out there. This one's open access. It's a good read. What I like about it is it really highlights, when you are strength testing in clinic, are all protocols the same? And I think the answer the short answer is no, they're not. It depends on what you want to test and what you want to get out of it. So you may not be using the same protocol on every single individual. So in clinic, we got 2 or 3 different sort of protocols depending on what we want to test and what the patient wants out of it as well. Is it useful as part of the rehab process? Again, lots of research out there. This one, again, is open access. I picked 2 open access papers. I put the reference at the end, so people can go and sort of have a read of some of the research. A lot of the others is behind closed doors, as it were, behind a paywall. And we know that testing throughout is useful. We know it is used a lot in elite sport, but at the end of the day, human beings are all made of the same stuff. It doesn't matter if you're a Premier League footballer or someone a bit of a weekend warrior. We're made of the same stuff. So is it useful? And yes, it is. But also I want to talk about why it's useful, but maybe not for the reasons you really think about. Because when you look at the research and the literature, the majority of the research around using strength testing in clinical practice is more your elite athletic population, or maybe military population. It'll be in footballers, American collegiate athletes, maybe military personnel. Whereas actually more realistic in clinic is actually seeing the young parents or the maybe slightly older generation, and they're not actually really represented that well in the research, but they still have goals and aspirations. And I think strength testing in practice can be very helpful in guiding someone through a rehab process. So why do we use it in clinic? It helps with sort of what I call emotional buy-in. And what I mean by that is trying to get someone to understand why they're doing the plan they want to do, so they can get that consistency. We've got a little thing in clinic in the gym on the wall saying sort of perfection is impossible, but everyone can be consistent. And we all know when we're going through any sort of rehabilitation process that actually the consistency is the absolutely king and really key part. So we use these tools in clinic to help show people throughout a process how they're progressing on, where they started, where they finish. They can really start understanding, okay, this is why you're telling me to work on X, Y, and Z, because we can see the strength just not where it needs to be. So that leads on to the next point. It really helps then guide through that rehabilitation journey. So patients don't feel like you're not just taking a stab in the dark and guessing, you're actually putting some data that is personalized to them. It's their data behind it to help get them where they want to go to. And then also finally, it helps with also clinical decision making. So you may find there's lots of things to work on throughout a rehab plan, but you may take the pathology, you can use the data to work out a plan of, right, we're going to work on A, then B, and then C, and then relay it to the patient and say, look, this is now going to take us sort of 4 or 5 months to get you to where you need to get to, but we can help you along that journey. So when do we use it in clinic? So the majority of the time we use it as part of the rehabilitation process. So for us, it is the main reasons are start and end of a rehabilitation or treatment plan. If someone is post-op, we may use it in the middle as well, not always, but we definitely use it at the start and the end. And the reason we use it at the end as well is to show people the progress that they have made within that rehabilitation process. Because we all know that the rehab process doesn't stop once we've helped them get back to the activity that they want to do. We know they need to keep on doing their maintenance stuff to maintain all that hard work that they've just put in. So if you can show someone that they've actually made good progress, we tend to find it really motivates them to keep on going. And I'm personally, I audit a lot of things. So we know that, and we'll run through our rehab structure towards the end of this, but there's a reason why we do it in the way that we do it. And we know it's 6, 12, and 18 months. 96% of people are still doing all the work they want, 74% are still doing all the sport, and 60% have had a big increase in their activity levels and are still increasing after coming to see us. We also do it as one-off strength testing. We call it a body strength analysis. So we see, especially since the pandemic, people who don't have any problems, but want to be proactive, say, look, I'm in my 60s now, I've just retired, I want to increase my activity levels. What can I do to make sure when I'm 80, I'm still active? And then we then also looking at, just started doing some team screening, whether that's within different companies, so corporate screening, within people who have active jobs, or whether that is sports teams as well. So they're the 3 avenues we use it, but during the rehab process is, I would say, 70% of when we use it. So the key questions about if you're going to look at using strength testing in clinical practice is, how are you going to show the data to your patient? And this is, for me, the hands down reason why I use the strength by numbers stuff is how they portray data to the patient. You've also got to think about how is it going to impact your treatment plan, but how are you going to communicate all these tests to a patient in a nice, simple way? I've used different kits in the past that I just didn't quite get on with because the hardware, yeah, great. But when it comes to showing patients the data, there was just lots of graphs. You get a report from a battery of tests that's 13 pages long, and you show that to the patients, and you just get that glazed eye over their face, and they just don't really get what's going on. Whereas the strength by numbers uses this nice traffic light um, reporting system. Yes, we can go and get all the rate of force development curves and max force curves, and we can get all of that. But patients don't care about that. We may want to look at that data, but patients just want to have it in a nice, simple form. And this is the big USP, in my opinion, of strength by numbers. And I think they do it better than anyone else, is because they keep the data simple for patients. So if we take one of our patients here, you get an overall strength score. That is basically taking all of the tests available and then it maps you against a pain-free database, or not a database of people who have different ages, sexes, and heights. And then it then maps you where do you sit within that population. You can then also get the graph to have a look at the percentiles wherever you're sitting. So you may find that something slightly red, but actually you may be just below average. So basically with the graphs, it is green is above average, dark green is well above average, sort of, and then you're looking at yellow, and then red is needs a lot of work. So very much like a traffic light symbol. And patients just look at it and they just get it. And I think it's just a really, really simple way. Then same patient at the end of the rehab process, you can then show them the progress that they have made. And everything we can see has had a positive impact. And the look on the patient's face, they're like, oh my God, yes, I really get this. This is why I need to do my regular strength work, even when I finish seeing you guys at AxIT, to really keep on going. When they see the scores at the start, they're like, oh, that's a bit naff, really, not what I wanted, but I now know I need to really focus on work. And they're almost motivated to get it done, get on working with things. And I think this is just so, so important in how we portray data. In elite sport, yes, you want all the fancy curves because actually the athlete's hardly seeing the data. You've got a team of people managing that data. The athlete's just doing what they're told. But when we're dealing with general members of the public, they need to have that emotional buy-in. They need to understand, why are you asking me? I've come to see you, Nick, for an Achilles problem. Why are we working on some hip strength type issues? And this really helps show that to them. So when you're looking at the strength by numbers stuff, you got your push it, you pull it, and you stomp it. So your stomp it's obviously your force plates, and then you pull it and push it to your handheld dynamometers. And they can all be used for different things. We use all three in clinic. We will use the push it. But the thing with the push it with any other handheld dynamometer, where you're applying the countermeasure, as it were, is you got to try and make sure you got the same person doing the test every single time. With the pullet, you can do a more static isometric testing, so the patient's only pulling against themselves, and the pullet is then tied around a couch, squat rack, pillar. In our clinic, we've got like a barn type clinic, so we've got lots of big oak beams, so our pullet is just tied around different parts of the oak beams. And then the stomp it is obviously looking at your force platform. So you're looking at your mid-thigh pulls, you're looking at single leg balance, you're looking at jump height, you're looking at rate of force development, those kind of things. And they are all really, really, I think, beneficial in clinic, but different protocols for different people. We may not, in the elderly population, we may not use the pullet as much because that requires getting in different positions. So we may find actually the push it is adequate for them. So it goes back to what I said earlier about different testing protocols to fit with different populations and people you're testing. So what do we do in clinic with it? So it's always a common question I get asked is, right, you integrate it, but how do you integrate it? So for us, in our demographic of patients, we see our demo in the south of England, we're predominantly a white British middle class catchment area of patients is what we tend to see. We put it together as part of our rehab package. The reason we bundle it together in these 5 sessions is our data from the sort of the last 700 treatments is we tend to find 5 rehab sessions works for 96% of people that we see in our clinic. So that's why we put it there. We then put the strength testing at the start and at the end, and then we bundle it together for a fixed fee of that 545, and we'll on average do about 15 to 20 of those packages a month. So having the strength testing kit in practice, whilst if we're just doing a nice strength testing on its own, we'll charge £150 for, building as part of a package does help us from a revenue perspective as well. When we then look at, so we did publish some work around this at one of the podiatry conferences, and we took a selection, a very small cohort of our patients, maybe 12, and we took 3 different conditions. We took, I think, the peroneal tendinopathy, midfoot OA, and then also Achilles tendinopathy. And then we tracked them and looked at their outcome and looked at what they're doing 6 months later. In 100% of people, we found there was a strength improvement and they achieved the goals they wanted to do. When we then looked at the exercises those people had been given, there was, I think, 102 different exercises throughout all their programs and that cohort of people. So it really showed us a lot of the time, is the physical exercise you give them the important part, or is it actually the consistency of them doing something and progressing on a regular basis? And we just found when you're doing some sort of testing and you can show that back to the patient, I think it really helps give them focus and works on that emotional buy-in, and really then just helps them be consistency and helps them build compliance. Considerations, we have to remember that we're not doing it in lab-based settings. So yes, you will be able to pick holes in the protocols that we do, and we just have to remember that. But also we're doing it in clinic, we're working with people, we're working with patients. So we want to make it as robust as possible and repeatable and reliable as possible. But there is always going to be elements in any form of testing outside of a lab base where you may have some inaccuracy. So this is why if we're using the push it, we'll try and make sure the same person does that testing on that person on the repeat. So we're not getting any difference between clinicians. And it's not all about the numbers. It's about showing someone and giving them that, okay, showing them where they're at. Remember, this data is personal to them. They're not worried about the rest of the database. They're just worried about where do they sit. They don't care about n equals 10,000. They care about n equals 1. And it's our job to take that n equals 10,000 data and apply it back to them and help portray it in a way that they can easily and readily understand nice and quickly. But yet, I get it. And I think this is why I really harp on about portraying the data and showing the data and how important it is. So it's not just about the numbers. Think about the patients, think about the buy-in, think about the compliance, think about the increased readiness for them to actually say, yes, I want to do this, I want to continue to get better. What we've now also found is we're now starting to see a cohort of patients come back, say 6 months after their treatment, say, look, I'm fine. But actually, I wouldn't mind having a retest just to make sure, is there anything else I can be working on? Because I want to do everything I can to reduce the risk of the problem occurring. And I want to make sure I keep leading an active lifestyle. And it doesn't matter. It's that the lady you saw was Pippa. I think she's 82 now. It doesn't matter if you're 82 or you're 17. People still have goals. And actually, we tend to find in clinic for us, it's actually the people approaching retirement age are actually more motivated than anyone, because they're like, right, I'm giving up work. I've got all this free time. I want to go traveling. I want to make sure I can go and travel the world without worrying about getting niggles and injuries or anything along those lines. There's a link to those 2 papers. Katie, I'm happy to share the PDF slides of this. So if I share these as the PDF, then automatically in the PDF, these are hyperlinked directly to those articles. So people then just go to click and get the open access articles. So any questions at all, really? So yeah, just a quick whistle stop tour, but the Q&A bit is, I think, the bit where just ask me how am I using it in clinic and ask anything that you want, really. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nick. Yeah, that was really useful and definitely a nice practical insight as well there. As we mentioned, we're going to start by answering some of the pre-submitted questions. Again, if you do have any questions and you are on the session live, please use the Q&A tab and we can get to those as well. So Nick, the first few questions then. So we had, would the force plates be useful in determining if a limb length discrepancy is likely to be problematic?
That is I will give the long answer. There's a short answer to this, but I'll give the long answer and my reasoning why. So I think I need to answer this in two parts. One, could the force plates help determine is there a leg length discrepancy? Yes, there is. Yes, it could do, because you can look at how much load and what the balance is between how much weight is shared between each foot. It can do that, which may be suggestive of leg length. There are other reasons why that can happen as well. However, funnily enough, my last patient was leg length issue, being told she had a 30 mil difference. I don't think she has, and we're actually saying actually you maybe got a lot less than that. Measuring and treating leg length is much of a witchcraft that is a science, in that there's no bit of technology that can tell you whether a leg length is going to be symptomatic or problematic. We can use technology. So I use 3D gaze analysis. I will use the force plates, and it can tell me there's a leg length. It can tell me how someone's compensating for a leg length, but it can't tell me is that always the cause of the symptoms. So my advice with things like that is, if you think it's symptomatic, then try and add a heel raise in, or if possible, a sole raise. Getting a little more clinical here, but adding a sole raise mechanically is always better than adding in just a heel raise if possible. But as soon as you get anything above 12 millimeters, you have to then start raising the shoe externally, which has other issues in that you increase the weight of the shoe and you reduce how much the shoe can flex and bend. So in a real short answer, could the force plate tell you of something symptomatic with regards to a leg length? No, it can't, but that's not a force plate issue. That's any bit of kit issue. But could it tell you there's a leg length? Yes, it could suggest there is a leg length.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's really helpful there. Thank you. Lovely. The next question, has there been any audits carried out to establish whether introducing muscle power data measuring increased turnover?
So we haven't looked at our audit with regards to increased turnover from a business viewpoint. What we have looked at, though, is because we've integrated as part of the rehab package, we know that we are doing more rehab packages since using it. So yes, turnover has increased, but part of that turnover is part of the rehab package. But where we've then even integrated, we've got the strength testing and shockwave as a package, and we've also got an anti-gravity treadmill package as well with the strength testing. What we know is that more people are signing up for those packages of care than they were previously. And when we increased the price of the package to incorporate doing the strength testing stuff, we saw an increase in the number of people doing it. We haven't seen a reduction in the number of people signing up. So before doing the strength testing stuff, we were on about £350 for the rehab. We're now 545. When you show people what they're getting for it, no one says no.
Yeah.
So have I done a direct audit? No, but we know turnover has increased because of it. But we know we're also getting busier in clinic as well. So we haven't seen a reduction since we started adding it and increased the cost. No one's saying, oh no, that's too expensive, I don't want to do it. We've had the opposite of some people saying, I think you should charge more than 545.
Right. Okay. No, that's great. And I think, like I say, referenced a little bit in the slides as well about sort of the consideration of, like I say, that customer buy-in aspect, the return from the customers, the engagement, which obviously all this brings as well, isn't it? Rather than, like I say,
Yeah.
direct turnover if you measure just on that. So yeah, no, that's great there. We have had a question come through from Tim, who's live on the session. So he's asking, do you use any validated functional assessment tools in addition to your testing by numbers, pre and post rehab, to support the strength testing data?
Yes and no. We do use some, but we also made our own up. So I'm fortunate enough to have access to academics and professors from university. So the issues we have with some of the validated outcome measure tools is they don't always fit the population of data that we see in clinic, patients we see in clinic. They also don't always ask the right questions for what we wanted. So our patients who come to see us, pain isn't the primary motivator. Yes, pain is a driver, but when you sort of say what's more important, reducing pain or increasing activity levels, activities normally getting back to activity levels is their primary driver for us. So then when we then look at a range of different pathologies, we tried looking at different outcome measure tools and none of them really fitted what we wanted. And some of them are too long to fill in. I have a rule that any questionnaire has to be filled in under a minute, otherwise people aren't going to do it because people are just survey saturated with everyone gets every emails a day from Amazon or whatnot or any company saying you fill in our survey. If it's longer than a minute, it doesn't get done. So we actually sat down with two professors and another academic, and we really asked ourselves, what questions do we want answering to show that we're outputting what we're doing for our demographic of patients. So we actually come up with our own set of questions and tools. So we're at about 600 now. So we asked those questions at the start and the end. So we're at 650 completed of those. Then we ask the questions at 6, 12, and 18 months after discharge. So at 6 months, I think we're about 600 have filled, oh no, sorry, about 300 have filled in. And then at 12 months, it's around about 200, and at 18 months, it's about 150 have filled that data in for us now. So is the tool we use validated? No. Do we use some validated tools? Yes, but we can't use it on everyone because it doesn't work for us. So yes, we know what we do works in the population of data we see. The lovely question I'd love to answer is, oh, if I took our clinic and put it in an area of massive social deprivation and a mix of ethnic backgrounds, do we still get the same outcome? The honest answer is I don't know. So a bit of a long-winded answer to Tim's question there.
No, that's interesting. But that's answered that for you there, Tim. Great. So the next question then, just chatting a little bit about sort of the functionality of the AxIT platform itself. So we've had a question about how customizable the tests and protocols are. So obviously, sort of from your personal experience as well, and maybe just outlining a little bit of those, if that's okay.
Yeah, short answer, and short answer is extremely and very customizable, really easy to do.
Yeah.
And you can add your own tests as well. So you would have noticed, the eagle-eyed people watching, that on that patient's data, it had two bits where it sort of said not enough information or not assessed. And that was looking at toe strength. Not many people measure toe strength. As a podiatrist and as a sort of lower limb rehab center, we measure toe strength a lot. So that's our own test that we've added. The reason why it won't show us the number, it hasn't got enough data to form an average. So the beauty of the strength by numbers kit, you can add your own tests, but it won't show that patient where that person sits in a cohort unless it's got a big enough database to actually get a decent mean and average from that data. So we're now starting to find if you are male between the age of 40 and 60 and we test your toe strength, that is now showing up because we've tested enough blokes between that age. However, any other category and sex is sort of it doesn't show up yet. But then when you then look at your sort of battery and testing protocols, those lists of tests you saw is one that we've made up. We've basically taken, right, these are the tests that we want to do. And you just basically create your own playlists, and you can have as many playlists as you want. And it's really simple, just to say add to play, blah, 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 done,
Yeah.
run it, and then that's saved. So we got about 3 or 4 different playlists, as it were, to testing different people. The only thing is just make sure is that if you're going to retest someone, make sure you use the same playlist of tests every single
Yeah.
time. Otherwise, you're going to start getting different ways. And we even went one step further in that on some of the pullet tests, they'll conduct tests in certain ways, and it doesn't quite work for us sometimes in the flow. So we actually tested the team here in testing the way it is shown on the app. So if we take hip flexion, show the weight on the app for the pullet, we then done our own way, and actually the scores were the same. So we know we could use our own way of testing, but match it against the other database, because even though the testing method is slightly different, the outcomes from 8 different people were we got the same number regardless of what way. So that was really helpful. You also will find if you've got a lighter weight team member and you're trying to look at hamstring strength or something, and you're trying to use the pullet, and you've got a 120 kilo rugby player and they fire their hamstrings, if you then got someone who's 60 kilos the other side, a lot of the time that 60 kilo person may be laying on top of the 180 kilo person. So this is where actually sometimes using the pullet is better, because you haven't got to worry about having someone big enough to oppose that force.
Mhm.
So that's why having all three allow you the flexibility to do everything that you want. Because if we think about the testing, if someone can overpower you, the number's never going to be an accurate number, because you can't oppose the exact same force to give you that peak force. So if someone's overpowering you, then this is where the pullet is then really helpful, because um, unless they're pulling over pillars or something or whatnot, then or it's even sometimes for the pullet, we'll put it on a cable machine and just max the cable machine out. And so things like ankle strength test, no one's going to lift a whole rack of weights on a cable machine on testing ankle inversion and eversion. And you could argue if they can do that, then you're mostly arguing that ankle strength isn't an issue. So
No, that's great. It's really great to hear, actually. And like I say, I think with obviously the amount that you've used it, your experience with it, over time, I think that's where you guys and your team have built that competency with, being able to create those, playlists, and you're able to sort of, like say, comparison that with the existing data and so on. But it is quite interesting, obviously, with anyone who is just starting out with AxIT, the actual platform itself allows you just to pick from a library of tests. So you can start so simple, and it's not, too heavy. You can just click and sort of go with what's already inbuilt. There's inbuilt playlists, essentially. But that's where, as a user and like as a clinician, like so you can build on that as you use the platform. And like you guys have, like you're understanding that more and more, and like you say, your playlist becoming more customizable to your particular patient group, which I think is important. So it's nice that you can, like I say, it's going to grow with you with regards to sort of the use of it, really, isn't it? And the approach that you have, the
yeah, and it's even when so if we're looking at testing some high level university athletes, and we're even looking at making different testing protocols for different sports.
Mhm.
So different sports may be important to test different things. So it allows us to do that. So a a back row or front row rugby player isn't having the same test done as a striker in football, for example,
Yeah.
because they're playing different sports, different activities. So we want different information.
Yeah, excellent. No, that's really great. And just on that as well, obviously one of the questions we had was about like how you communicate in the AxIT results, obviously the data that you're getting from the testing, to client, to patients, to clients,
Mhm.
help them better ease and understand, I guess, motivate them within programs. Obviously, you covered this quite a bit within the slides, and like I say, that slide itself when it was saying about simplicity.
Yeah.
So I guess obviously from your perspective and what the AxIT provides, obviously you showed how it was displayed, and how important do you think that is with regards to keeping it simple for your clients and for your patients to see that? And how does that differ from maybe some of the other interpretation of data that you might have seen on other bits of platforms before?
Oh, so it is absolutely key, and that was the big reason for me using AxIT. Um, the hardware between other stuff may be similar. I don't know the ins and outs of the hardware itself, but I know the software is how it portrays that data is so important. And even when we test elite athletes, people think, oh, they want all this complex data. When you show them the traffic light page, as we call it, they're like, no, I get it. People
Yeah,
think they want to know all that complex data, but in reality, they don't understand it.
yeah,
They understand what does it mean. They look at it and they're like, well, this is great, but how's it relevant to me? And actually, do we actually fully understand all that data? Most probably not. You've got to be a sports scientist to really understand that data properly, ins and outs of it. And so I think the is the most important thing. Is there's no point having data if you can't communicate that to the person that you are working with. Otherwise, the data is just as much use as the chocolate teapot, because the patient doesn't know what's going on. And we know that patient-centered care, everything needs to revolve around the patient. They need to be involved in the care process. We know from all the research and the literature, the more you involve the patient, the more involved in it, the
yeah,
more likely they are going to stick with you and do adhere to a treatment plan, because they've got that trust, they've got that relationship. If you just give them data and they're sat there nodding like one of those Churchill dogs you see in the back of a car type thing, um, they're saying yes, but they don't understand what it means. They'll go home and they'll be like, I've got this. Nick said a load of words, don't understand what he said. But now they can go back and look at the report, and you don't need to use any words, because we're all familiar with traffic lights, and it's sort of
yeah,
like it's so simple, and it works so well. And I was like, when I had the meeting with Strength by Numbers, it was sort of like when they showed me, I was like, yes, that's exactly what I've been after. I've used different systems and I haven't used their software. I created my own Excel sheet to show before and after and go different colors. So I made my own traffic light system of red and green, but I had to do that manually for everything,
yeah,
because that was better than other providers I've used in the past. And yeah, it is so important, and it's the key point. And that's the bit where I think people get so hung up on the actual physical numbers, but I'm like, the numbers are important, but they're not the most important thing. Your patient understanding is the most important thing.
yeah. And I think from us speaking to, some clinicians as well, like people can be quite maybe like feel quite daunted with maybe some sort of like testing or objective assessment using
Yeah,
some sort of technology in this space. And I think that's where it's very important, isn't it, to sort of say, as long as everything is kept simple, you can communicate that simplicity to your patients, then you're doing what you can do, like I say, and that's down to, if you wanted to look at that in a more analytical way, then that's down to each clinician. But like I say, you've got that sort of, comparison as a clinician, you can understand that from it within a second, it's showing
yeah,
you. And that's basically all you need to be knowing as well as the patient. So like I say, it's very much about yeah, not being too overfaced potentially with the thought of it, because it can be made simple, and it is simple, and it's just about so that practicality of like using it over time and building your own competency as you go on. But if you've got a platform like that to work off, then like say you've got your patients already visualizing
yeah.
and onboarding is the main thing.
Yes, exactly.
Lovely. Okay, so with regards to the last couple of questions to get through, are there specific populations or conditions where the AxIT system is particularly effective or not recommended?
So for me, it's it's not conditions. It's more about if we get someone who has the motivation to want to improve and want to do better, I think it could be useful for anyone. I think knowing where your strength is, I think is always a useful tool. Obviously, you've got to be careful about the test. If you've got someone who's got mobility issues, who struggles getting on and off the floor, maybe sat there doing some tests on the floor, or they've got troubles laying on their stomach, doing certain tests is going to be difficult. But that's the same considerations you would take with anything in normal clinical practice and assessments. Anyway, for us, it's been a real eye-opener for actually your sort of population of people of 50 plus, because they've been like actually the ones to be like, no, I want to really, really improve. And they're like, wow, yes, I need to work in it. And they're just taken back by the data and then get really, really get involved into the rehab plans. And it's like one of those things that they know, you've got a test at the end. And so you can't cram all your homework in at the end. And because it's like going to your dentist. Like if you don't brush your teeth, if you brush your teeth the day before, your dentist knows. Then it's with this. If you don't do your work throughout, um, you can't just magically improve your strength in the day. This is why doing the rehab plan in the stage process that it is allows us to then monitor people throughout. And if people are dropping off, we can say, okay, what's up? How can we help? Let's have a regroup. So there isn't anyone it's more, I would say, beneficial for. And we end up strength testing the majority of patients we end up seeing in clinic. Um, so so yeah, there's nothing really. So again, we've had a whole range from elite level athletes right up to someone sort of approaching their 90s. We've had my mother and father-in-law on it to like sort of say like the starting to get older now. It's like actually what can I do to help reduce the risk of falls as I get older and everything on those lines.
Yeah, yeah. So the goal's different, isn't it? But like I say, it fits at any
Yeah.
stage and with any populations. Okay, so again, I think you mentioned this a little bit through your talk, but a question about sort of how often should assessments be repeated, and how do you track progress over time? So you mentioned, didn't you, essentially sort of start and end of rehab, obviously for injury, you do, sort of complete it as a one-off sort of strength testing. Um, would you use it sort of within the rehab plan more often than start and end? Or again, is
So
that
I always use a strength testing at the start and the end. We may use it in the middle. Um, if we let me see if I can share my screen again. There we go. Let's present that. It'll help sort of explain if we go back to here. So we said this was a rough plan, but we'll see someone at week 1, then roughly week 3, then week 6, week 10, week 14. Anything grey is we call sort of doing your homework, self-directed learning. And that's the how often we'll see people from our data. That works for us. We're not saying that's the way that everyone should do it, but that works for us in clinic. We're very much a clinic of like we want to teach people to manage themselves. So as you'll notice, the gap between we see them gets longer and longer. So it allows people to continue doing their work outside of the sessions with us. So, and then we repeat again at the end. So that's roughly the structure and how often we would see someone in clinic. Post-op patients, we may see more frequently in the early days, but as a general rule of thumb, that's how we do it for the majority of patients, and that seems to work well. And I think it really helps get patients so they don't become reliant on us.
Yeah, no, that's a good point as well, isn't it? Reliance of it, because like you say, you want them to go away and work in between that, don't you? Rather get getting sort of addicted to the numbers maybe, or
Yeah.
what the assessments are saying. Okay, lovely. All right, we've got one last question here, and then I think everyone's sort of asked everything on the Q&A as well. So the last question, what has been the most positive feedback from clients about using the system? So what would you say, what's been the biggest impact for you generally?
So the biggest impact was, sorry, excuse me. We've had two recently. One who actually, her goal was, her daughter was doing a Boston Marathon a few weeks ago. And her goal was to be able to spend a day walking around Boston doing everything and building strength up. And we worked with her. Her strength improved massively. And then she come back and she was pain-free and she loved every minute. Marathon went well for her daughter and she was just so happy. And we've then had patients who have turned around and said, actually, do you know what? I can now just go do everything I want to do. I'm not fearful of falling anymore. I feel confident in just going out for the walks. And actually by doing the testing and going through the rehab and the exercises, it shows me that I can do a lot more than I think I do. It gave me a bit of confidence to just say, no, you have got the strength. You are good. You are fine. Just keep pushing forward. And then even like the lady we showed you doing the mid-thigh pull, she's got to the point where she realizes she's this type of person where she just needs a lot of not guidance, but she knows if she doesn't have regular sessions that she turns around and says, actually, I'm not going to do it. So now she actually comes, we got 2 or 3 people that actually come to see us on a weekly basis now. We told them they can go see PTs for half the price, but like, no, I want you guys to see me every week. And then we will retest their strength every 6 months and just making sure that it's going in the right direction. And they were just like, she's most probably our biggest advocate and advert for the whole thing. She tells everyone in the sort of retirement village she's in about need to go here, need to make sure you're strong, need to make sure you can learn to get up off the floor, fall over. So it's just stories like that just
Mhm.
makes me, even though I run a business, is why I will always see patients because that's why I do what I
Right,
do.
isn't
Because you're like,
it?
it actually means something
Mhm.
to them and it's helped give them a bit of their life back that they felt they
Yeah.
didn't have.
Yeah, and I think, like I say, the point of you were making about making them not scared to be able to move or to do, what their aim is to do. I think that's a really nice point as well, isn't it? Because I think these days, we can be scaremongered into, our symptoms and whatever
Yeah,
that may tell us on Google or whatever. But this is where like assessment, and actually like visual can come into play, isn't it, really, with, let's say, what we can do as clinicians, and really supporting them journeys, no matter if it is, like, say, rehabbing for a particular injury, or if it is actually the confidence and for them to move more, to make sure that they don't injure, essentially. So they're really nice, yeah, bits of impact stories there. So really nice to hear. Excellent. So I think we have gone through all the questions there, and we've covered everything come through live, which is great. So lovely. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Nick, for presenting for us today.
that's okay.
Definitely really great insight there, definitely really useful to everyone as well. So following today's session, everyone will receive the link to the webinar recording, and let's say, Nick, if you're happy to pass the slides as well, we can give
Yeah,
and send that across. And if anyone does want to get in touch with us or any further questions about what we've been chatting about today, then please do contact us directly. We'll be happy to chat through anything that we've spoke about this evening. So thanks again, and I hope everyone has a good rest of the evening. Thanks, Nick.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.